Late this afternoon, the House Intelligence Committee voted unanimously to release a Democratic memo that rebuts Republican accusations of missteps in the Russia election investigation. We heard more about it from Ranking Member Adam Schiff. This is 10 minutes.
Good evening. This evening, the House Intelligence Committee voted to release the minority response to the majority's memo, the Nunes memo. We think this will help inform the public of the many distortions and inaccuracies in the majority memo. We have also asked, as a part of our transmittal to the White House, that unlike the process that was used with the majority memo, that the Department of Justice and FBI be consulted, that they have the opportunity to vet any information that they may be concerned about in our memo in terms of sources and methods. We want to make sure that those that are in the best position to vet that have the opportunity to do so. The Department of Justice and FBI have already had our memo for several days. We also want to make sure that any redactions that are made are fully explained to our committee by the FBI or Department of Justice, and likewise by the White House. We want to make sure that the White House does not redact our memo for political purposes, and obviously that's a deep concern. The majority found themselves in an insupportable position when they released a misleading memo and refused to release the Democratic response. So I think they were compelled to take the action they did today, and we think this will be very useful information for the American people to see. I also want to say that my colleague, Mr. Quigley, again and repeatedly asked the chairman whether he or any of his staff had consulted with, coordinated, conceptualized this memo in combination with the White House. We know, after all, that the chairman embarked on a similar effort to coordinate a campaign early on in the investigation. And once again, Mr. Nunes refused to answer the questions. At the very end of the hearing, he gave a very lawyerly written response, or read a written response, saying that the White House had not been involved in the actual drafting of the memo. But in terms of whether it was coordinated with the White House or they were consulted or strategized, the whole concept, he refused to answer those questions. And obviously that's a very important question for our committee. The reality is that as this investigation has progressed, our own, perhaps more significantly the investigation by Bob Mueller, as more and more individuals have either been indicted or pled guilty in connection with this investigation, and the evidence has mounted, both in terms of the issue of collusion as well as the issue of obstruction. There is a rising sense of panic, clearly, within the White House and as well on the Hill. And as a result, we see a tactic we have often seen in criminal cases where, when the facts are increasingly incriminating of the defendant, there's an effort to put the government on trial. And so that brings us to where we are today, where our committee, Republicans, have endeavored to put the FBI on trial, put the Department of Justice on trial, impeach and impugn the hard work of these dedicated public servants at the FBI and the Department of Justice. We think this very ill serves the public, and we hope that they will stop. But nonetheless, the chairman has announced his intention to continue with other phases of this so-called investigation into the FBI and the Department of Justice and maybe other agencies. He has publicly described this memo as phase one. In fact, it's phase two. Phase one began with the midnight run and the presentation to the White House of information he'd gotten from the White House. So this is phase two. We hope these phases of distraction will come to an end, and once again the committee will focus on what the Russians did to interfere in our election, what we know about the Trump campaign's contacts and communication or collusion with the Russians, and what we can do to prevent this from happening in the future. So that's where we hope our investigation will get back on track. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Congressman Schiff, first of all, what was the vote to release the memo? Any assurances that if the president does block this, there will be further action taken to have a vote in the House override?
The vote was unanimous to release this. I think the Republican members understood that after calling for full transparency, they were getting hammered over the course of the week for trying to hide the minority response. What will we do if the White House essentially either redacts to protect itself or refuses to release? I think it's going to be very hard for the White House, like it was hard for the Republicans on our committee, to block release of this. I am more concerned that they make political redactions, not redactions to protect sources and methods. And that's why we're going to insist that the Department of Justice and the FBI report to us on what redactions they think are necessary so that we can segregate any political interference from the White House.
Have you already given him a copy, the DOJ and FBI doing? Have they seen this memo already?
Yes, the Department of Justice and the FBI have had our memo for days. Unlike the process the majority used, we want their feedback. We want their input. So they've had it for days. It is our understanding and expectation that our memo will be going to the White House tonight. So as of tonight, that 5-day clock is ticking.
Have they, as the Justice Department or the FBI, have they weighed in yet on specific redactions that they want in the memo yet at this point?
At this point, they have not weighed in. I'm sure they've been awaiting this process and the vote of the committee. But we fully would expect in any rational process that the agencies that are most heavily implicated, and here it's the FBI and the Department of Justice because they're conducting the investigation, would have the paramount say in terms of what might be revealed as to sources, as to methods, and also as to the ongoing investigation.
Have you given any evidence also that Nunes has coordinated with the White House in any way? Do you have any evidence of that, or is it just him not acknowledging whether this happened or not?
Well, you know, for those of us on the committee, this just looks too much like a rerun of that that charade at the beginning of the investigation. And that took place the day after James Comey testified in our open session that he had, since last July, had an ongoing counterintelligence investigation. So this looks too much like a rerun of that. And of course, we're all the more concerned when the chairman refuses to answer questions.
Mr. Schiff, does the memo end the debacle over this surveillance of Mr. Page? Is the committee going to return to the investigating the Russian collusion? And what does this portend for future relations between Democrats and Republicans on this panel, which has traditionally been a bipartisan one?
Well, I would hope that we can get back in earnest to doing the investigation that we were given the charge to do, and that is the Russian interference in our election and the issue of collusion with the Trump campaign. Obviously, there are a whole host of very concerning meetings which initially the administration, the president, denied took place, and then when it was revealed they took place, generated false statements to cover up what the true intent of those meetings was. You had the National Security Advisor lie about his contacts with the Russians and plead guilty to doing so. You had one of the foreign policy advisors for the campaign also plead guilty to lying to the FBI. Those indictments and those convictions took place in record speed in a matter of months of this investigation. And for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle or in the White House to say they've seen no evidence of collusion, you really have to be trying to look away, trying to ignore what is obvious to make a suggestion like that. You know, I often do the mental exercise of saying, what would be the response if it were suddenly disclosed that former National Security Advisor Susan Rice had had secret conversations with the Russians to undermine the bipartisan policy of the United States and would plead guilty to a federal offense about that? What would be the reaction? Would people say that's not evidence of any collusion with the Russians? Of course they wouldn't say that. And there are serious allegations that need investigation. It's not enough just to bring people in for them to deny the facts. That's not how an investigation is conducted. One of the things that will become clear when the transcript of tonight's hearing is revealed, which we expect will be published in the next day or two, is we've made repeated requests to the majority to subpoena documents, to test what witnesses are telling us. That's how an investigation is conducted, only to have those requests stonewalled. So for an administration and a majority in our committee to say they want this investigation to go on expeditiously, they're moving very slowly when it comes to getting necessary information and evidence. Witnesses that have refused to answer questions are given a pass. We still want Don Jr. to come back before our committee and answer questions about his conversations with his father that produced that very false and misleading statement. We want Steve Bannon to come back to this committee. We want Corey Lewandowski to come back before this committee. Corey Lewandowski didn't even claim privilege. He just says, I'm not really prepared to answer those questions. Has he been subpoenaed by the majority? The answer is no. That's inexcusable. And there are countless other examples. We know that Don Jr. was direct messaging WikiLeaks. We would like to subpoena Twitter to get those direct messages, but the majority has so far refused. It's time for this majority to make the decision to be serious investigators, to get the information we need that can either prove or disprove these allegations. And we hope that that's what they will return to do. Thank you.